Zara stared at the name on the building, her heart pounding wildly. Washington Airlines, a subsidiary of Carter Enterprises. 3 months ago, a flight attendant had humiliated her daughter. Today, as CEO, she would fire everyone responsible. The attendant's shocked face appeared in the doorway. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe in standing up against discrimination, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to follow more stories of people turning injustice into triumph. Now let's find out how a simple flight turned into a battle for dignity and respect. 12-year-old Amara Carter clutched her backpack tightly as she boarded Washington Airlines Flight 257 bound for Atlanta. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, not just because she was visiting her beloved grandmother, but because inside that backpack was her pride and joy. A revolutionary solar energy device that had just won first place at the National Junior Science Competition. The gold medal tucked inside her pencil case was physical proof that her brilliant mind could change the world. "Come on, sweetie," her mother Zara urged gently. "Let's find our seats." They made their way down the aisle of the airplane toward the first-class section. Normally, they would have flown economy, but Amara's science victory had come with perks, including upgraded tickets for her and her mother. It was meant to be a celebration, a moment of triumph for all the late nights Amara had spent perfecting her invention. Flight attendant Brittany Wilson was arranging welcome drinks on her cart when she spotted them approaching. Her smile faltered momentarily, her eyes narrowing as she watched them settle into seats 2A and 2B. Brittany had been working first class on Washington Airlines for 7 years, and she had certain expectations about who belonged there. "Excuse me," Brittany said, her voice carrying a razor's edge beneath its sugary coating. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" Zara looked up, momentarily confused. "Yes, we're in 2A and 2B. She showed their boarding passes. Brittany examined them with exaggerated scrutiny, her lips pursed. "I see. That's unusual." She didn't elaborate on what exactly was unusual about a mother and daughter having first-class tickets. Amara, already carefully stowing her precious backpack under the seat in front of her, didn't notice the exchange. The solar device inside was delicate. Glass components and precise circuitry that had taken months to calibrate correctly. "Would you like a pre-departure beverage?" Brittany asked the white businessman in 1A, her voice warming considerably. "Scotch, neat please," he replied without looking up from his laptop. "Coming right up, sir," Brittany beamed, pouring his drink with theatrical flourish. When she turned to Zara and Amara, her demeanor chilled again. "You'll need to put that backpack in the overhead compartment," she instructed Amara sharply. "It's taking up too much room." "But my science project is inside," Amara explained politely. "It's very fragile and It's policy," Brittany interrupted. "First class or not, the rules apply to everyone." Her emphasis on everyone carried unmistakable weight. Zara intervened. "The flight attendant on our previous connection allowed it because of the special circumstances. Perhaps you could—" "I don't care what another flight attendant did," Brittany cut her off. "On my flight, we follow proper procedure." Across the aisle, a white family had several bags tucked under their seats. Brittany stepped around them, without comment. Reluctantly, Amara lifted her backpack, but before she could stand, Brittany reached down and grabbed it. "I'll take care of this," she said impatiently. "Please be careful," Amara pleaded, her voice small but urgent. "It has my science project inside and—" Brittany was already walking away, the backpack dangling carelessly from her hand. When she reached the overhead bin, she found it nearly full with designer luggage. With a quick glance back at Amara and Zara, she shoved the backpack roughly with her foot, kicking it toward the back of the compartment to make it fit. The sound of breaking glass was faint but unmistakable. Amara's eyes widened in horror. She unbuckled her seatbelt instantly and rushed to the overhead bin, her heart pounding. "My project!" she gasped. "Sit down immediately," Brittany commanded. "We're preparing for departure." "But I heard something break," Amara said, tears welling in her eyes. "Please, I need to check." "You need to take your seat," Brittany insisted, her voice rising. Other passengers were beginning to stare. Zara appeared beside her daughter, a protective hand on her shoulder. My daughter worked for months on her science project. If it's damaged, then she should have packed it properly, Brittany said dismissively. Now please return to your seats, or I'll need to involve the captain. Amara's tears were flowing, freely now. All those nights of hard work, the pride she'd felt when the judges had called her name, all potentially destroyed because of this woman's callousness. Back in their seats, Zara tried to comfort her daughter while containing her own anger. We'll check it as soon as we land, sweetie. Maybe it's not as bad as we think. But the knot in Amara's stomach told her otherwise. She'd heard that distinctive sound of glass components shifting and breaking. Throughout the flight, the discriminatory treatment continued. When Brittany served drinks to the cabin, she skipped their row entirely. When Zara pressed the call button to request service, 20 minutes passed before another flight attendant responded. Brittany is handling this section, the second attendant said uncomfortably. She seems to be handling everyone except us, Zara replied evenly. The flight attendant had the decency to look embarrassed but offered no solution. Meanwhile, the businessman in 1A received constant attention, fresh drinks appearing before he could ask, warm towels, extra pillows. Other white passengers in the first class received similar treatment. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Even more telling were the whispered conversations and knowing glances exchanged between crew members when they thought no one was looking. One younger flight attendant seemed uncomfortable with the situation but didn't intervene. Midway through the flight, the captain made an announcement over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been informed we have some special guests on board today. In seat 5C, we have retired Colonel James Whitfield returning from active duty. And in seat 3A, we have concert pianist Richard Evans traveling to a performance with the Atlanta Symphony. Please join me in thanking them for their contributions. Applause rippled through the cabin. Zara's jaw tightened. When they'd checked in, the gate agent had noted Amara's science competition victory and assured them the flight crew would be informed. Yet here was the captain, acknowledging other passengers' accomplishments while ignoring her daughter's. When they finally landed in Atlanta, Amara rushed to the overhead bin. Her hands trembled as she unzipped the backpack and peered inside. The solar collector, the heart of her invention, lay in pieces. The precision-cut glass panels had shattered, and the delicate wiring had been crushed. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's ruined." Zara took one look at the destroyed project and marched toward the front of the plane where Brittany was saying goodbye to deplaning passengers. "I need to speak with your supervisor immediately," Zara demanded. Brittany's smile didn't falter. "If you'd like to file a complaint, you can do so at the customer service desk in the terminal." "You deliberately damaged my daughter's property after we specifically told you it was fragile," Zara said, her voice level but intense. "I want to speak with someone in authority now." "I handled your bag according to standard procedure," Brittany replied coldly. "If something fragile wasn't properly packed, that's not the airline's responsibility." The businessman from 1A pushed past them, and Brittany's demeanor transformed instantly. "Thank you for flying with us today, Mr. Davidson. We hope to see you again soon." At the customer service desk, they encountered similar stonewalling. The representative took perfunctory notes but made it clear nothing would come of their complaint. "We'll certainly look into this," she said with practiced insincerity. "If you'll leave your contact information, someone may follow up within 6 to 8 weeks. As they left the desk, Amara wiped away tears with the back of her hand. "It's okay, Mom," she said, trying to be brave. "I can rebuild it. I have my notes and—" "No, baby, it's not okay," Zara replied, her voice gentle, but her eyes flashing with determination. She pulled out her phone and stepped away for a moment, speaking in low, urgent tones. When she returned, something had changed in her expression, a steely resolve that hadn't been there before. "Who did you call?" "Amara." "Your father," Zara answered simply. "And this is far from over." Dominic Carter stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Tokyo Metropolitan Building, 45 stories above the glittering city. The view was spectacular, but he barely noticed it. His attention was fixed on the multinational executives, seated around the conference table behind him, representatives from 3 different technology firms eager to partner with Carter Enterprises on its revolutionary new energy storage system. He'd been working toward this meeting for months. Years, really, if you counted all the research and development that had gone into the technology. This deal could expand his company's global footprint exponentially. But none of that mattered. The moment his phone vibrated with Zara's name on the screen. "Gentlemen, excuse me for a moment," he said smoothly, stepping outside into the hallway. "Zara, is everything all right?" As he listened to his wife describe what had happened to their daughter, Dominic's expression darkened. His free hand clenched into a fist, then deliberately relaxed, a control technique he'd perfected over decades of navigating spaces where his anger, no matter how justified, would be used against him. "Put Amara on the phone," he requested, his voice softening. "Hey, Daddy," came his daughter's voice, thick with tears she was trying to hide. "I'm so sorry about your project, Sunshine," he said gently. "I know how hard you worked on it." "It's just glass and wires," Amara said unconvincingly. "I can make another one." "You shouldn't have to," Dominic replied. "And you won't have to face people like that flight attendant without consequences. Not anymore. Not my daughter." After reassuring Amara and speaking briefly with Zara again, Dominic ended the call and stood motionless in the hallway, memories flooding back. He remembered being 19, the only black student in his engineering program, having his senior project accidentally destroyed by a lab technician who'd always made his discomfort clear. He remembered being told he'd have to redo 6 months of work in 2 weeks if he wanted to graduate on time. He remembered being 30, pitching his first company to a room of investors who spoke over him, questioned credentials they wouldn't have questioned from anyone else, and ultimately decided his business was too risky, only to fund an identical concept from a white entrepreneur 3 months later. He remembered every rental application mysteriously rejected, every time he was followed in high-end stores, every conversation that stopped when he entered a room, every promotion that went to someone less qualified but more culturally aligned with the organization. And he remembered the promise he'd made the day Amara was born, that his daughter would walk through a world with fewer barriers than he had faced, that she would never doubt her brilliance or her worth because of someone else's prejudice. Dominic Carter had built his business empire from nothing, navigating a system designed to exclude people who looked like him. He'd succeeded not despite the obstacles, but because they had forged in him an unshakable determination. But he had always hoped Amara would be free to soar without constantly fighting gravity. His assistant, Trevor Phillips, appeared at his elbow, concern evident on his face. "Sir, the Nakamura team is getting restless. Should I tell them you'll be a few more minutes?" Dominic made a swift decision. "Tell them I've had a family emergency and need to reschedule. Book me on the next flight back to the States." Trevor blinked in surprise. "Sir, this meeting has been in the works for—" "I know exactly how long we've been planning this, Trevor, and I know exactly how much is at stake. But some things are more important than business deals." As Trevor hurried away to make arrangements, Dominic pulled out his phone again and called a different number. "Vanessa, it's Dominic. Remember that Washington Airlines opportunity we discussed last quarter? I want to accelerate our timeline, pull together everything we have on their financials, organizational structure, and ownership patterns. I need it all by the time I land in New York." Vanessa Chen, his chief strategy officer, was too experienced to sound flustered. "That's a significant acceleration, Dominic. May I ask what's changed?" "Everything," he replied. "And I want our acquisition team assembled in the Manhattan office tomorrow morning. This is now our top priority." By the time Dominic boarded his private jet 4 hours later, his plan was already taking shape. Washington Airlines was part of Taylor Transport Group, a mid-sized corporation that had overextended itself with acquisitions in the past 5 years. Their debt load was substantial, their stock performance mediocre, and rumor had it their CEO, Richard Taylor, was more concerned with his golf handicap than his company's future. Carter Enterprises had been eyeing several airlines as potential acquisition targets as part of a larger strategy to diversify their holdings. Washington Airlines had been on the list, but not at the top. Until now. As the jet prepared for takeoff, Trevor voiced his concerns one last time. "Dominic, I respect that this is personal for you, but making business decisions emotionally is... Stop right there, Dominic interrupted, his tone leaving no room for debate. Don't mistake my decisiveness for emotionality. Washington Airlines was already a viable acquisition target. I'm simply reprioritizing our timeline based on new information. What he didn't say, what he didn't need to say to Trevor, who had worked alongside him for 15 years, was that business had always been personal for Dominic Carter. Every venture, every acquisition, every product launched by Carter Enterprises carried the weight of his vision to create spaces where excellence was the only measure that mattered, where his daughter and children who looked like her could thrive without having their belongings kicked aside by someone who thought they didn't belong. During the long flight, Dominic reviewed the preliminary data on Washington Airlines, identifying pressure points and potential strategies. The company was more vulnerable than he'd initially realized. Heavy debt, aging fleet, and declining customer satisfaction scores. Their only real strength was a few exclusive airport terminal contracts, and even those were coming up for renewal soon. Midway across the Pacific, he received a call from his board chairman, Harold Washington, a veteran businessman who had been one of Dominic's earliest mentors. Dominic, Trevor briefed me on this airline situation, Harold said without preamble. Moving this fast carries significant risks. The board will have questions. I'm prepared to answer them, Dominic replied. This acquisition makes sense financially, Harold. Their stock is undervalued. Their routes complement our existing transportation interests, and there are substantial synergies with our logistics division. And it has nothing to do with what happened to Amara? Dominic paused. Harold was one of the few people who could speak to him this directly. It has everything to do with Amara, and with every child who's been made to feel less than because of the color of their skin. But that doesn't make it a bad business decision. Sometimes justice and profit point in the same direction. Harold's sigh was audible even through the satellite connection. You know I'm with you. I just want to make sure you've thought this through. Taylor won't go down without a fight. I'm counting on it, Dominic said grimly. As he ended the call, a memory surfaced, so vivid it might have happened yesterday instead of 35 years ago. He was 10 years old, proudly wearing his father's worn but treasured watch to school. His father, a city bus driver who worked double shifts to keep food on the table, had given it to him that morning. This was my father's watch, William Carter had said, fastening it around his son's small wrist. Someday when you have a child of your own, you'll pass it on too. By afternoon, the watch was gone, ripped from his wrist by older boys who told him little black boys don't need fancy watches. When he'd fought back, it was Dominic who got suspended. The watch was never recovered. That day had taught him two painful lessons: that the world would try to take what was his, and that systems designed to protect everyone often protected some more than others. As his jet soared over the vast Pacific, Dominic made a silent vow that this time, the outcome would be different. This time, justice would prevail. Washington Airlines has no idea what's coming, he whispered to himself as the first rays of sunrise broke across the horizon. What happens when a man with unlimited resources decides to uncover the truth? What lengths would you go to if someone hurt your child? Would you move mountains, buy companies, change entire systems to ensure justice? Comment number 1 if you believe Dominic is justified in using his power to fight back, or number 2 if you think he's taking things too far. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see how this story of justice unfolds. Now, let's discover what Dominic's investigation reveals about Washington Airlines. Within 24 hours of landing in New York, Dominic Carter had assembled an elite team in the glass-walled conference room of Carter Enterprises' Manhattan headquarters. The investigation into Washington Airlines would be thorough, meticulous, and completely discreet. I want to know everything about this company, Dominic told the assembled group. Every complaint, every lawsuit, every instance of discriminatory behavior, documented or buried. I want to know who's responsible and who's been protecting them. At the center of this operation was Alicia Thompson, a former FBI investigator who now ran her own corporate intelligence firm. As a black woman who had battled discrimination throughout her law enforcement career, she understood the mission on multiple levels. We'll approach this from several angles simultaneously, Alicia explained, her laser pointer highlighting sections of a flowchart projected on the wall. Financial audits, employee interviews, customer experience analysis, and internal communications review. Nothing gets missed. Dominic nodded. How soon can you start? My team is already working, Alicia replied with a slight smile. Background checks on key executives began the moment you called. We've identified 27 former employees willing to talk, and we're analyzing 7 years of customer complaint data. For the next 2 weeks, Alicia's team worked relentlessly. They created dummy customer accounts to test service response times across demographic groups. They deployed mystery shoppers of various races to document treatment differences. They established encrypted channels for current employees to report incidents anonymously. The picture that emerged was disturbing, but not surprising to anyone who had experienced systemic discrimination. We've identified clear patterns, Alicia reported during their third briefing. She spread photographs across the conference table. Flight attendant Brittany Wilson featured prominently among them. This particular employee has received 17 formal complaints in the past 3 years, all from passengers of color. Not a single one resulted in disciplinary action. How is that possible? Asked James Wong, Dominic's chief financial advisor. Alicia slid another document forward. Because her uncle is senior vice president of operations, Robert Wilson. Every complaint disappears into his office, never to emerge again. But Brittany was merely a symptom of a much larger disease. Alicia's team uncovered a troubling culture throughout Washington Airlines, from discriminatory hiring practices to a tiered service model that explicitly instructed staff to provide better service to those who look like they belong in first class. We've obtained copies of their training materials, Alicia said, displaying slides on the screen. This section on identifying high-value customers might as well be titled, How to Spot Rich White People. The investigation also revealed that Washington Airlines security footage, which would have clearly shown Brittany's treatment of Amara's backpack, had been conveniently lost after Zara's complaint. That's not unusual, Alicia noted. Their system automatically flags complaints from passengers with certain area codes or ethnic-sounding names for special handling, which includes evidence disappearing. But perhaps most damning were the internal communications Alicia's team managed to obtain through a whistleblower, email chains and messaging logs that showed CEO Richard Taylor's awareness and tacit approval of these practices. Look at this exchange, Alicia said, highlighting an email from Taylor to his executive team following a discrimination lawsuit that had been settled quietly the previous year. He writes, "These people need to understand that premium service is called premium for a reason. Not everyone belongs in first class and not everyone should be treated the same. Handle it discreetly, but handle it." Dominic's expression remained impassive, but his eyes hardened as he read the message. "This goes beyond one flight attendant or one incident," he said quietly. "This is systemic, intentional discrimination built into their business model." While the discrimination findings were infuriating, Alicia's financial team uncovered additional issues that would prove useful in an acquisition strategy. "They've been falsifying maintenance records," reported Chen Wei, Alicia's forensic accountant. "Cutting corners on safety inspections to reduce costs. If the FAA knew the extent of it, they'd ground half their fleet." "Any evidence this has caused actual safety incidents?" Dominic asked sharply. 3 near misses in the past 18 months, Chen confirmed. All internally documented, all covered up. No passengers were injured, but it was luck, not proper maintenance, that prevented disasters. This information changed the dynamics considerably. What had begun as a personal mission was now a matter of public safety as well. The investigation faced obstacles, of course. When Alicia's team attempted to access Washington Airlines headquarters for interviews, they were stopped by security and threatened with trespassing charges. Anonymous threatening calls were made to her office. A junior member of her team was followed home one night by an unmarked car. None of it deterred them. If anything, the resistance confirmed they were uncovering truths the airline desperately wanted to keep hidden. 3 weeks into the investigation, they identified the key to unraveling Washington Airlines' protection scheme. Brittany Wilson's family connections extended beyond her uncle. Her grandfather had been a founding investor in the airline, and the Wilson family still controlled a significant block of shares through various trusts and holding companies. That's why she's untouchable, Alicia explained. It's not just nepotism, it's ownership. The Wilsons consider the airline partly theirs, and in some ways, they're right. This revelation gave Dominic a new strategic approach. If ownership was the ultimate shield, then changing ownership would be the ultimate solution. As the investigation concluded its fourth week, Dominic received Alicia's comprehensive report. Over 300 pages documenting discriminatory incidents, safety violations, financial irregularities, and toxic corporate culture. It was a damning portrait of a company whose public image of service and safety masked a reality of bias and negligence. That evening, Dominic sat in his home office reviewing the findings one last time. The desk lamp cast a warm glow over the document spread before him, contrasting with the cold anger he felt reading account after account of passengers humiliated, employees silenced, and regulations flouted. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Amara stood in the doorway, her expression somber. "Dad, can I come in?" "Of course, sunshine." Dominic quickly gathered the papers, but not before Amara caught a glimpse of a photo. Brittany Wilson's staff ID picture. "That's her," Amara said quietly. "The flight attendant." Dominic nodded, not denying what his daughter had seen. "How are you feeling about everything?" Amara shrugged, trying to appear more casual than she felt. "I started rebuilding my project. It won't be ready for the national showcase next month, but maybe for next year's competition." The resignation in her voice broke Dominic's heart. His brilliant, confident daughter had been taught a lesson he'd hoped she'd never have to learn, that no matter her achievements, some people would see only her skin color. "You know," Dominic said carefully, "sometimes when systems fail us, we have to create new systems." Amara looked up at him curiously. "Is that what you're doing with all these papers? Creating a new system?" Dominic smiled. "Something like that. I'm making sure what happened to you doesn't happen to another child." "How?" Amara asked. "By changing the rules of the game," Dominic replied. "And by remembering that justice delayed isn't always justice denied." As Amara hugged him goodnight, Dominic felt his resolve strengthen. The investigation had given him ammunition, but more importantly, it had confirmed what he already knew. Washington Airlines didn't just need new ownership, it needed a complete transformation. And he was just the person to deliver it. The wood-paneled executive suite on the 60th floor of Carter Tower hummed with focused energy as Dominic addressed his assembled team. Maps of airline routes covered one wall, financial projections another, and a digital countdown clock ticked away the seconds until markets opened. "Washington Airlines is vulnerable," Dominic began, his voice steady and determined. "Their stock has underperformed for 6 consecutive quarters. Their debt-to-equity ratio is concerning, and their fleet modernization program is 3 years behind schedule. But most importantly, Richard Taylor has grown complacent. He believes his position is unassailable." James Wong, Dominic's chief financial advisor, stepped forward. A brilliant Harvard MBA with 20 years of experience in mergers and acquisitions, James had initially been skeptical about the accelerated timeline. Now, having reviewed the data, his concerns were different. "The acquisition is financially viable," James acknowledged, "but the speed you're proposing carries significant risks. Hostile takeovers typically take months, sometimes years. You're talking about weeks." "Washington Airlines doesn't have months," Dominic countered. "Their safety violations alone represent an imminent risk to passengers. And every day that company operates under current management is another day someone's child might be treated the way Amara was treated." Anthony Davis, Dominic's childhood friend and now Carter Enterprises lead counsel, nodded in agreement. Growing up in the same Philadelphia neighborhood, they had faced similar barriers and developed similar determination to overcome them. Now, with his legal expertise, Anthony would be instrumental in navigating the complex regulatory landscape of an airline acquisition. "I've identified 3 primary approaches," Anthony explained. highlighting sections of the presentation on the main screen. 1. A direct stock purchase on the open market, accumulating shares gradually. 2. Approaching major institutional investors with premium offers for their blocks. 3. A tender offer directly to shareholders, bypassing management entirely. All three, Dominic decided, simultaneously. A murmur rippled through the room. This was an unusually aggressive approach, even for Dominic Carter, whose bold business strategies were legendary. That will alert Taylor immediately, warned Vanessa Chen, the strategy officer. He'll implement defensive measures. I'm counting on it, Dominic replied. Taylor's defensive measures will be predictable, legally questionable, and ultimately futile. But they'll distract him from noticing our real strategy until it's too late. For the next several hours, the team refined their approach, identifying Washington Airlines' financial vulnerabilities and leverage points. The airline's debt structure was particularly problematic. They had loans coming due within 6 months that they would struggle to refinance, given their current credit rating. Their balance sheet is weaker than it appears, James noted. They've been using accounting tricks to mask the extent of their cash flow problems. One major disruption could send them into a tailspin. By midnight, the comprehensive takeover plan had taken shape. It would require perfect execution, substantial financial resources, and absolute secrecy, but it was viable. The team dispersed to their respective departments to begin implementation, leaving Dominic alone with his thoughts. His moment of solitude was short-lived. His private line rang, a number he recognized instantly. Victor, Dominic acknowledged, keeping his tone neutral. It's late for a social call. Victor Reynolds' laugh was as smooth and cold as glacier ice. Nothing social about it, Dominic. Word is you're making a move on Washington Airlines. I'm calling to suggest you reconsider. The fact that Victor already knew about the acquisition plan was concerning, but not entirely surprising. As the CEO of Reynolds Global, Victor had spies everywhere, and he and Dominic had been rivals since their days at Wharton Business School 30 years earlier. Their competition had intensified when Dominic's renewable energy patents had rendered Victor's oil investments less valuable. Your concern for my business decisions is touching, Dominic replied dryly, but unnecessary. Is it? Victor's voice hardened. Because my analysts tell me you're moving too fast, paying too much, and risking too much, all because your kid had a bad experience on a flight. That doesn't sound like the calculated Dominic Carter I know. Dominic felt a flash of anger, but controlled it. Victor was trying to provoke him, to confirm his suspicion that this was an emotional decision rather than a strategic one. Your analysts should stick to what they know, which clearly isn't Carter Enterprises' strategy, Dominic responded evenly. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's late. One more thing, Victor added. I've been looking at Washington Airlines myself. Their Southeast Asian routes would complement my portfolio nicely. I'd hate for us to drive up the price in a bidding war. The implied threat was clear. Victor was prepared to compete for Washington Airlines, not because he particularly wanted the company, but because Dominic wanted it. After ending the call, Dominic immediately contacted his security team to investigate how the information had leaked. Then he called Anthony to add a new component to their strategy, countermeasures against Victor Reynolds' potential interference. The next morning brought new challenges. As Dominic navigated the complex web of financial regulations governing airline acquisitions, he encountered unexpected resistance from the Department of Transportation. Someone, likely Taylor or Reynolds, had whispered concerns about market concentration and reduced competition. Anthony worked his contacts in Washington, D.C., explaining that Carter Enterprises' ownership would actually increase competition by revitalizing a struggling airline. Meanwhile, Dominic personally called several key regulators, outlining his vision for Washington Airlines' future. I understand your concerns, he told the Deputy Secretary of Transportation, but I can assure you that under our ownership, Washington Airlines will not only maintain all current routes, but expand service to underserved communities. By the end of the week, the regulatory hurdles had been largely cleared, but other obstacles emerged. Several major shareholders who had initially seemed receptive to Dominic's overtures suddenly went cold. Likely pressured by Taylor, or incentivized by Reynolds. The financial stakes were enormous. Carter Enterprises had committed billions to this acquisition, leveraging assets that Dominic had spent decades building. If the takeover failed, the company would recover eventually, but the setback would be substantial. "Are you sure this is worth the risk?" James asked during a rare moment alone with Dominic. "From a purely financial perspective, there are safer acquisitions with higher potential returns." Dominic walked to the window, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. "When I started this company, every banker and investor told me the risk wasn't worth it, that I should set my sights lower, be more realistic about what someone with my background could achieve." He turned back to James. "Some risks look different depending on where you're standing and why you're taking them." That evening, Dominic returned home later than usual, mentally exhausted from the day's battles. He found Zara waiting for him in the kitchen, concern evident in her eyes. "You missed dinner again," she said gently. Amara waited up as long as she could. "I'm sorry," Dominic sighed, loosening his tie. "Things are moving quickly with the acquisition, and there are complications." Zara studied her husband's face. They had been partners in every sense for 20 years, supporting each other through the challenges of building both a business and a family in a world that hadn't always welcomed their success. "Dominic," she said carefully, "I'm worried. This is consuming you. What happened to Amara was wrong, and that flight attendant should be held accountable. But buying an entire airline, risking everything you've built, is justice supposed to look like this?" Her question struck at the heart of what had been troubling Dominic as well. Was this about justice, or had it become about power? About proving he could bend the world to his will when his daughter was wronged? "I don't know if it's justice," he admitted after a long moment, "but I know it's necessary. What happened to Amara isn't isolated or accidental. It's the product of systems designed to protect people like Brittany Wilson and Richard Taylor at the expense of people who look like our daughter." Zara took his hands in hers. "Then change the system. But don't lose yourself in the process. Amara needs her father more than she needs the CEO of Washington Airlines." Dominic nodded, absorbing his wife's wisdom. "You're right. I'll find better balance." He hesitated, then added, "But I'm not backing down on the acquisition. Some battles need to be fought even if victory isn't guaranteed." Later that night, as Dominic reviewed the latest updates from his team, he made his final decision. Despite the obstacles, despite the risks, despite Victor Reynolds' interference, Carter Enterprises would proceed with the takeover bid for Washington Airlines. The company that had humiliated his daughter would soon have a new owner, new policies, and a new understanding of consequences. And if Richard Taylor wanted a fight, Dominic Carter was more than ready to give him one. In the oak-paneled executive boardroom of Washington Airlines Atlanta headquarters, CEO Richard Taylor slammed his fist on the glossy table, causing water glasses to jump and executives to flinch. "This is nothing short of corporate terrorism," he fumed, his face flushed red beneath his silver hair. "Dominic Carter thinks he can just waltz in and take what I've spent 30 years building? Not while I'm breathing." His executive team exchanged nervous glances. The aggressive acquisition moves by Carter Enterprises had caught them all by surprise, and Taylor's increasingly volatile reactions weren't inspiring confidence. "Richard," ventured Chief Financial Officer Patricia Barnes, "perhaps we should consider the offer. At 20% above market value, the shareholders might view it." "The shareholders will do what I tell them to do," Taylor interrupted sharply. "And I'm telling them this company is not for sale, especially not to Dominic Carter." What Taylor didn't share with his team was the personal history between himself and Dominic. 20 years earlier, when Dominic was seeking investors for his fledgling technology company, Taylor had been among those who dismissed him, making remarks about affirmative action entrepreneurs that had fortunately been recorded by Dominic's assistant. That recording had never been made public, but Taylor lived in fear that it might surface if Dominic gained control of Washington Airlines. "We need immediate defensive measures," Taylor instructed his team. "Implement the poison pill we prepared for situations like this." Contact our institutional investors and remind them of our long-term value proposition. And get our PR team working on a narrative that paints Carter as a predatory raider with no understanding of the airline industry. As his executives scrambled to execute his orders, Taylor made a private call to Robert Wilson, the senior VP of operations, and uncle to flight attendant Brittany Wilson. "Your niece has created a problem," Taylor said without preamble. Apparently, she had some kind of run-in with Dominic Carter's daughter, and now he's using it as an excuse for this takeover attempt. Robert Wilson sighed heavily. "Brittany mentioned a complaint from a passenger a few weeks ago, but nothing that seems serious. What do you need me to do?" "Damage control. Suspend her temporarily. Make it look like we're addressing the situation. I need to show the board we're taking this seriously while we fight off Carter's bid." Within hours, Washington Airlines launched its counteroffensive. Their stock exchange filing activated a shareholder rights plan, commonly known as a poison pill, designed to make any hostile takeover prohibitively expensive. Their PR department released statements questioning Carter's motives and expertise, suggesting the acquisition would lead to route cuts and job losses. Simultaneously, the airline announced new diversity initiatives and enhanced customer service training, transparently attempting to address the issues Dominic's team had uncovered without acknowledging any wrongdoing. Brittany Wilson was placed on administrative leave, a move characterized as standard procedure during an internal investigation. In reality, she was receiving full pay while staying at her family's lake house, instructed to avoid social media and decline all interview requests. These defensive maneuvers succeeded in temporarily stabilizing Washington Airlines' stock price, preventing the immediate share acquisition strategy Dominic had planned. But they did nothing to address the underlying issues that had made the company vulnerable in the first place. As days passed, the battle intensified. Washington Airlines' legal team filed complaints with regulatory agencies, alleging market manipulation by Carter Enterprises. Their lobbyists whispered concerns about job losses in congressional offices. Their public relations officers planted stories questioning Dominic's motives. "Revenge takeover?" blared one business publication headline. Sources suggest Carter's bid for Washington Airlines motivated by personal grudge, not business logic. Dominic had anticipated these tactics and remained unruffled. During a CNBC interview, he calmly addressed the allegations. Carter Enterprises evaluates acquisition targets based on their potential value and alignment with our long-term strategy. Washington Airlines fits both criteria, despite its current management challenges. His measured response frustrated Taylor, who had hoped to provoke an emotional reaction that would reinforce the revenge narrative. Desperate to stop the acquisition momentum, Taylor requested a private meeting with Dominic, held at a neutral location, an exclusive Manhattan restaurant known for its discretion. Their conversation was brief and unproductive. "Name your price." "To walk away," Taylor offered, sliding a folded paper across the table. Dominic didn't even look at the number. "This isn't about price, Richard. It's about accountability." "So it is personal," Taylor said with a thin smile. "I thought so. Is this about your daughter's backpack? I'll buy her a new one. Hell, I'll buy her a whole set of designer luggage if it'll make this go away." "That's always been your problem, Richard," Dominic replied evenly. "You think everything and everyone has a price. Some things are about principles." As Dominic stood to leave, Taylor's facade of civility cracked. "You people always play the victim," he hissed. "One little incident and you're ready to destroy a company that employs thousands. Is that your idea of social justice?" Dominic paused, looking down at the man he now recognized as dangerously desperate. "No, Richard. My idea of justice is creating systems where incidents like what happened to my daughter don't occur in the first place, and since you failed to create such a system, I'll do it myself." Meanwhile, Washington Airlines employees were growing increasingly anxious. The company's internal messaging attempted to reassure them that their jobs were secure, but rumors of Carter Enterprises' reputation for post-acquisition restructuring sparked fears. What Taylor hadn't anticipated was that many employees, particularly those from minority groups who had experienced the company's discriminatory culture firsthand, quietly welcomed the prospect of new ownership. One such employee, Senior Systems Administrator Darius Jackson made a decision that would prove pivotal. For years, Darius had maintained the servers containing Washington Airlines' internal communications. He had seen the discriminatory directives, the buried complaints, the evidence of safety violations. He had watched talented colleagues passed over for promotion because they didn't fit the company's preferred image. After much soul-searching, Darius compiled a secure file of damaging internal documents and anonymously sent them to Carter Enterprises. The information provided Dominic with additional leverage in his acquisition strategy and evidence to counter Washington Airlines' public denials of systemic problems. As pressure mounted, Taylor made his most desperate move yet. He contacted Victor Reynolds, offering to sell him a significant block of Washington Airlines shares at below market value, solely to keep them out of Dominic's hands. "I don't particularly care who owns this airline in the long run," Taylor admitted to Reynolds during a late-night call. "I just can't let Carter win. Not like this. Not because of some perceived slight against his precious daughter." Reynolds, seeing an opportunity to both thwart his rival and potentially profit, agreed to the arrangement. "Send over the paperwork. I'll have my team review it immediately." What neither man knew was that their conversation had been recorded by one of Reynolds' own executives who, disgusted by the naked racism underlying their discussion, forwarded the recording to Dominic's team. The chess game continued, with moves and countermoves playing out across regulatory filings, court challenges, and media narratives. Washington Airlines appeared to be holding its ground, but beneath the surface, their position was weakening. Key investors, initially supportive of Taylor's resistance, began to waver as more evidence of mismanagement emerged. The temporary suspension of Brittany Wilson backfired when several other passengers came forward with similar stories of discriminatory treatment, suggesting a pattern rather than an isolated incident. Most damaging was a viral video that surfaced on social media. Footage from 6 months earlier showing Brittany making dismissive comments about a Hispanic family struggling with English in the first-class cabin. The video directly contradicted Washington Airlines' claim that they had no previous concerns about her conduct. As public opinion turned against the airline, Taylor's resistance grew increasingly desperate and erratic. He fired loyal executives who suggested compromise, alienated board members by making decisions without consultation, and publicly attacked Dominic with thinly veiled racial undertones that damaged the company's already struggling reputation. Throughout this tumultuous period, Amara watched her father with a mixture of awe and concern. The business battle was teaching her lessons about power, principle, and perseverance that no classroom could provide. But she also saw the toll it was taking on him: the late nights, the constant strategy sessions, the weight of responsibility for thousands of employees' futures. One evening, she brought her rebuilt science project to his home office. The solar energy device was different from the original, more elegant in some ways, more resilient in others. "I made it better," she told him proudly. "After it broke, I figured out improvements I hadn't thought of before." Dominic studied the device, noting the innovations his daughter had incorporated. "Sometimes," he said thoughtfully, "things have to break before they can be rebuilt properly." Amara nodded, understanding he wasn't just talking about her project. "Is that what you're doing with the airline, Dad? Breaking it so you can rebuild it better?" "That's exactly what I'm doing, Sunshine," Dominic confirmed. "And when it's rebuilt, it will be stronger, fairer, and more successful than it ever was before." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent call. Richard Taylor, increasingly isolated and desperate, was demanding another meeting, this time with specific threats if Dominic didn't comply. The battle for Washington Airlines was approaching its climax, and both sides knew it. But only one side understood that the true victory wouldn't be measured in stock certificates or corporate assets, but in creating a world where excellence was rewarded regardless of race and where accountability wasn't optional. And Dominic Carter was determined to be on the winning side. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were working against you the entire time? What would you do if someone you relied on betrayed you at the most critical moment? Comment number 1. If you've ever experienced betrayal from someone close. Or number 2, if you think Dominic should have been more careful about who he trusted. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see how he handles this devastating setback. Now, let's see how Dominic responds when betrayal threatens. Everything he's fought for. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Carter Enterprises' strategy room, illuminating the determined faces of Dominic's acquisition team. For weeks, they had worked tirelessly, navigating regulatory hurdles, countering Washington Airlines' defensive tactics, and gradually accumulating shares whenever possible. They were making progress, slower than Dominic had hoped, but steady. Their financial analysts projected they would reach the critical threshold of 30% ownership within days, enough to force serious negotiations with Washington Airlines board. Michael Foster, Dominic's recently hired acquisition specialist, stood at the front of the room reviewing their latest tactical adjustments. With his impressive credentials from Goldman Sachs and reputation for executing complex takeovers, Foster had been a key addition to the team. Our consortium of Asian investors is prepared to move on the next block of shares, Foster explained, highlighting a section of his presentation. If we execute at the opening bell tomorrow, we can secure another 3% before Taylor's team can respond. Dominic nodded approvingly. Excellent work, Michael. And our European financing? Fully committed, Foster confirmed. The funds will be available for the final push next week. The meeting concluded with a sense of cautious optimism. After the others filed out, Foster lingered, organizing his notes with meticulous precision. "Something on your mind, Michael?" Dominic asked. Foster hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Just wondering if you've considered Taylor's latest settlement offer. $300 million is significant compensation for what happened to your daughter." This stopped being about compensation the moment I saw the pattern of discrimination throughout that airline, Dominic replied. "Some things can't be settled with a check." Foster nodded, but something in his expression seemed off, a flicker of disagreement quickly masked by professional deference. "Of course, I'll finalize tomorrow's execution plan and send it to your secure server." What Dominic didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Michael Foster had already sent a very different plan to Richard Taylor's office. The betrayal unfolded with devastating precision the next morning. As Carter Enterprises prepared to execute their share acquisition strategy, financial news networks erupted with breaking news. Washington Airlines CEO Richard Taylor announces major restructuring plan. Stock surges 15%. Taylor's televised announcement was a masterclass in corporate misdirection. He unveiled a strategic partnership with Reynolds Global, new fleet modernization initiatives, and executive leadership changes, all designed to boost the stock price and derail Dominic's acquisition plan. Most alarming was Taylor's specifics. Rebuttal of concerns Dominic's team had intended to raise the following week. Concerns that had been detailed in confidential strategy documents. "Some corporate raiders have suggested our maintenance programs are inadequate," Taylor said smoothly. "Today we're announcing a comprehensive maintenance overhaul that exceeds industry standards, demonstrating our unwavering commitment to passenger safety." As Taylor continued outlining initiatives that precisely countered Carter Enterprises' planned criticisms, the truth became undeniable. Someone had leaked their entire strategy. Dominic immediately convened an emergency meeting in a secure conference room with all electronic devices banned. "We have a mole," he stated flatly. "Everything we've planned, every pressure point we've identified, Taylor is addressing all of it. He couldn't have done that without inside information. Security Chief David Chen was already investigating. We're conducting a full audit of all access to our secure servers. In the meantime, we need to assume all our current strategies are compromised." The financial consequences were immediate and severe. The investor consortium that had committed financing for their share acquisition withdrew, citing increased acquisition costs due to the stock price surge. Several institutional investors who had been quietly supportive of Carter Enterprises' bid publicly pledged support for Taylor's new initiatives. Most damaging was the narrative Taylor skillfully crafted for the business media, that Dominic's takeover attempt was motivated purely by personal revenge, not sound business strategy. Sources close to Carter confirm acquisition plan motivated by dispute involving CEO's daughter, reported the Wall Street Journal. Analysts question whether emotional decision-making has compromised Carter Enterprises' due diligence. By afternoon, Dominic's security team had identified the breach. Server logs showed Michael Foster accessing confidential strategy documents at unusual hours and transmitting large files to external addresses. Further investigation revealed encrypted communications between Foster and Richard Taylor dating back weeks. When confronted in Dominic's office, Foster showed neither shame nor remorse. "Business is business," he said with a shrug. "Taylor offered me a position as his CFO once this is over. Your acquisition was never going to succeed, Dominic. You moved too fast, pushed too hard, and made it personal. I just chose the winning side." "Get out of my building," Dominic replied, his voice deadly calm. "Security will escort you to the street. Whatever Taylor promised you, I hope it was worth sacrificing your professional reputation." Foster smirked as he stood to leave. "My reputation will be fine. I'll be the man who saved Washington Airlines from an emotional, revenge-driven takeover." The business world understands pragmatism. After Foster was removed, Dominic faced his most difficult challenge yet. The betrayal had not only compromised their strategy, but had also shaken investor confidence. Several board members requested an emergency meeting to discuss abandoning the acquisition attempt. "We've lost over $40 million on this already," argued board member William Peterson. "Taylor has outmaneuvered us. The stock price is now prohibitively high, and our financing has evaporated. It's time to cut our losses." For the first time since the campaign began, Dominic felt doubt creeping in. Had he let his determination to right a wrong cloud his business judgment? Had he risked too much of what he'd built pursuing justice for Amara? That evening, he returned home earlier than usual, mentally exhausted from the day's events. He found Zara and Amara in the kitchen, preparing dinner together. "Dad!" Amara exclaimed, surprised by his unexpected appearance. "We're making Grandma's jollof rice recipe. Wanna help?" The normalcy of the moment, his wife and daughter cooking, homework spread across the counter, the familiar sense of family recipes, provided perspective that his corporate boardroom couldn't. Later, after Amara had gone to bed, Zara found Dominic in his study, staring thoughtfully at a photograph of his parents. "The board wants me to walk away from Washington Airlines," he told her. "After Foster's betrayal, they think it's a lost cause." Zara sat beside him. "And what do you think?" "I think Taylor believes he's won because he understands business but doesn't understand principle," Dominic replied. "He thinks everyone has a price, everyone can be bought or scared off. He's never faced someone who simply refuses to lose." "Like you," Zara said with a small smile. "Like us," Dominic corrected. "Like everyone who's ever been told they don't belong in first class, or in executive suites, or in positions of power." Zara took his hand. "Then don't walk away, but don't do it alone either." The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Gregory Phillips, a retired airline executive who had worked under Taylor before being forced out years earlier, contacted Dominic's office requesting an urgent meeting. "Taylor's celebration is premature," Phillips told Dominic when they met. "His partnership with Reynolds is a house of cards. I know because I structured similar deals during my time there." Phillips explained that Washington Airlines had hidden vulnerabilities that even Foster might not have known about. Leveraged assets, sale-leaseback arrangements on their fleet, and technical defaults on certain loan covenants that creditors had temporarily waived. "Taylor's entire empire is built on managing perceptions," Phillips explained. "If the right pressure is applied in the right places, it will collapse faster than anyone expects." With Phillips's insights, Dominic began reconstructing his strategy from scratch. Rather than pursuing traditional acquisition approaches that Taylor was prepared to counter, he would target the airline's underlying financial structure, the foundation Taylor believed was secure. "We don't need to buy Washington Airlines outright," Dominic told his reassembled team. "We just need to control its debt." The betrayal that had seemed catastrophic now offered an unexpected advantage. Taylor believed he knew Dominic's playbook and had stopped watching for new threats. This strategic blind spot would prove fatal to his defense. As Dominic implemented his revised plan, he reflected on an old lesson from his father. When you're knocked down, You don't just get back up the same way. You get up smarter, more determined, and ready to win by any legitimate means necessary. Foster's betrayal had knocked him down, but Dominic Carter was most definitely getting back up, and Richard Taylor had no idea what was coming. The next phase of Dominic's revised strategy unfolded with surgical precision. Rather than directly pursuing Washington Airlines stock, he focused on the company's complex debt structure, the financial foundation that Taylor believed was secure, but was actually built on shifting sand. Every airline operates on leverage, Dominic explained to his restructured acquisition team. Their assets are financed through a web of loans, bonds, and lease agreements. Control the debt, and you effectively control the company. Carter Enterprises' technology division accelerated development of a revolutionary booking and logistics system they had been working on for the transportation sector. Within 2 weeks, they launched SkyConnect, a platform that offered unprecedented efficiency for airlines and enhanced experiences for passengers. The timing was strategic. Washington Airlines was due to renew several major corporate contracts, including those with Fortune 500 companies that represented significant portions of their business travel revenue. Dominic personally reached out to these corporate clients, offering SkyConnect integration with other airlines at substantially discounted rates. The efficiency savings were too compelling to ignore, and one by one, major accounts began shifting their business away from Washington Airlines. Simultaneously, Alicia Thompson's investigative findings were strategically released to selected journalists. The Washington Post published a devastating expose titled "Pattern of Discrimination: Inside Washington Airlines' Toxic Culture," featuring interviews with former employees and passengers who had experienced treatment similar to Amara's. The article detailed how complaints from passengers of color were systematically buried, how minority employees were passed over for promotion despite superior qualifications, and how the Wilson family's influence protected problematic employees, like Brittany. Washington Airlines' PR team scrambled to contain the damage, arranging for Brittany Wilson to give an exclusive interview defending her actions. It backfired spectacularly when she appeared defensive and entitled, dismissing concerns about discrimination as oversensitivity. "I treat all passengers according to company standards," she insisted. "If some people feel they deserve special treatment just because they're flying first class for the first time, that's not my problem." Her comments sparked immediate backlash on social media, with thousands sharing their own experiences of discrimination on Washington Airlines flights. The hashtag #JustBoycottWashingtonAir began trending nationally. The situation worsened when a passenger's smartphone video surfaced, showing Brittany making derogatory comments to a Hispanic family struggling with English during boarding. The undeniable evidence directly contradicted her claims, and Washington Airlines' official statements defending her conduct. As public opinion turned sharply against the airline, corporate clients accelerated their exodus. Washington Airlines' stock price, which had surged following Taylor's announcement of the Reynolds partnership, began to plummet. Dominic's financial team, led by James Wong, implemented the next phase of their plan, targeting Washington Airlines' debt structure. Through a series of discrete transactions using subsidiary companies and investment vehicles, they began acquiring the airline's outstanding bonds and securing positions with their primary lenders. "Taylor thinks he's protected because Reynolds is backing his stock," James explained, "but he's overlooking his debt covenants. If enough corporate clients leave and their cash flow drops below certain thresholds, those covenants will trigger technical defaults." The strategy was working, even faster than Dominic had anticipated. Within 3 weeks, Washington Airlines faced a crisis on multiple fronts: declining bookings, corporate contract cancellations, a public relations disaster, and increasingly nervous creditors. Behind the scenes, Richard Taylor was becoming desperate. His partnership with Reynolds was showing strain, as the financial projections they had based their agreement on proved wildly optimistic. Several board members were privately questioning his leadership and the wisdom of rejecting Dominic's original acquisition offer. Despite these mounting pressures, Taylor maintained a facade of confidence, assuring investors and employees that the current challenges were temporary. "Every company faces turbulence occasionally," he told CNBC. Washington Airlines has weathered storms before and will emerge stronger from this one. What Taylor didn't reveal was that Washington Airlines was rapidly burning through its cash reserves. The fleet modernization he had proudly announced was now on hold, and executive salaries, except his own, had been quietly reduced. As Taylor's position weakened, Dominic secured new financing through a consortium of international investors impressed by both the business opportunity and his principled stand against discrimination. With fresh capital, Carter Enterprises accelerated their debt acquisition strategy. At home, Dominic noticed a surprising development. Amara had developed a keen interest in the business aspects of the acquisition. She began asking sophisticated questions about corporate strategy, financial leverage, and leadership principles. "Dad, if you buy Washington Airlines, what will you change first?" she asked one evening as they reviewed her homework. "The culture," Dominic replied without hesitation. "Assets, roots, even branding. All of that is secondary. What matters most is creating an environment where everyone is treated with dignity, and excellence is the only measure that matters." Amara nodded thoughtfully. "Like how you built Carter Enterprises." "Exactly. Companies reflect their leadership. When leadership values the wrong things, everything else follows." These conversations revealed something Dominic hadn't fully appreciated. Before, beyond seeking justice for a specific incident, he was showing his daughter how to transform systems from within. He was demonstrating that power, when wielded with principle, could be a force for positive change. The turning point came unexpectedly during week 8 of the campaign. One of Washington Airlines' largest creditors, concerned about the company's deteriorating financial position, contacted Dominic directly. "We're holding $300 million in Washington Airlines debt," the bank's representative explained. "Given recent developments, we're open to discussing a transfer of these obligations to a more stable entity." Within 48 hours, Carter Enterprises had secured control of over 40% of Washington Airlines' outstanding debt. This gave them significant leverage over the company's operations and financial decisions, even without majority stock ownership. The final piece fell into place when an anonymous source, likely Darius Jackson, the systems administrator who had previously leaked internal documents, provided evidence that Taylor had misrepresented the airline's financial health to shareholders during his defensive campaign against Dominic's acquisition. Armed with this information, Dominic's legal team prepared SEC filings alleging securities violations. Before they could submit them, Taylor made a desperate move. He called Dominic directly, demanding a face-to-face meeting. "This has gone far enough," Taylor said, his voice betraying his exhaustion. "You've made your point. Name your price to end this." "It's not about price, Richard," Dominic replied calmly. "It's about accountability and change. But I'm willing to meet. Tomorrow, noon, at the Capitol Grill downtown." As Dominic ended the call, he knew they had reached the decisive moment in this long battle. Taylor wouldn't be reaching out unless he recognized his position was untenable. The question now was whether he would surrender gracefully or make one final desperate stand. Either way, Dominic would be ready. The weeks since Foster's betrayal had taught him valuable lessons about trust, resilience, and the unexpected paths victory sometimes takes. What had begun as a father's righteous anger had evolved into something more profound, a systematic dismantling of entrenched discrimination and the creation of something better in its place. As he prepared for the confrontation with Taylor, Dominic reflected that true change rarely comes from outside pressure alone. It comes when that pressure reveals the fundamental weaknesses in unjust systems, causing them to collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. Washington Airlines was about to experience that collapse, and from its ruins, something far better would rise. The Capitol Grill's private dining room radiated old-world luxury, dark wood paneling, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. It was neutral territory, a place where business titans often negotiated deals over rare steaks and expensive bourbon. Dominic arrived precisely at noon, with Zara at his side. His decision to bring only his wife had been deliberate. This meeting wasn't about legal tactics or financial maneuvers. It was about principles. Richard Taylor entered 15 minutes late, a power move that fell flat given the circumstances. Behind him trailed a phalanx of support, his chief financial officer, 2 attorneys, and Victor Reynolds, whose presence confirmed the depth of Taylor's desperation. Taylor's eyebrows rose at the sight of Zara. "I wasn't aware this would be a social occasion," he remarked coolly. "It's not," Dominic replied. "My wife is here because what happened to our daughter concerns both of us, and because Zara has expertise that will be relevant to our discussion." Taylor's team arranged themselves along one side of the mahogany table, spreading documents like a defensive wall. Dominic and Zara sat opposite them, noticeably without papers or portfolios, a statement that they weren't there to negotiate details, but principles. A waiter appeared to take drink orders. Taylor requested a double scotch. Dominic and Zara asked for water. The contrast was subtle, but telling. "Let's cut to the chase," Taylor began once the waiter had departed. "Your campaign against Washington Airlines has done considerable damage. You've manipulated media narratives, interfered with our corporate relationships, and destabilized our stock price, all because of a minor incident involving your daughter's backpack." Zara's expression remained composed, but her eyes flashed. "Minor incident?" she repeated. "Is that how you characterize racial discrimination at your airline, Mr. Taylor?" Taylor's face tightened. "With all due respect, Mrs. Carter, you're emotionally invested in a situation you've misinterpreted. Brittany Wilson is one of our most experienced flight attendants. If she appeared brusque, it was because she was enforcing standard safety protocols." "Is it standard protocol to handle white passengers' bags with care while kicking the belongings of a black child?" Zara asked, her voice level but intense. "Is it standard protocol to ignore service requests from passengers of color while providing attentive service to others? Is it standard protocol to protect employees with documented histories of discrimination because of their family connections?" Taylor's attorney interjected. "These allegations are unsubstantiated and potentially defamatory. We suggest—" "They're extensively documented," Dominic interrupted. 17 formal complaints against Brittany Wilson from passengers of color, all buried by her uncle, Robert Wilson. Internal training materials instructing staff to provide tiered service based on profiling passengers. Email exchanges showing you personally approved these practices. He pushed a single folder across the table, a summary of Alicia Thompson's investigation findings. "This is just the executive summary. The full report runs to 300 pages. Taylor barely glanced at the folder. "Every company has disgruntled employees and customers who claim discrimination when they don't get special treatment. That doesn't make it true." "Special treatment?" Zara echoed, incredulity in her voice. "My daughter won a national science competition. She wasn't asking for special treatment, just the basic respect any paying customer deserves." Victor Reynolds, who had been silently observing, chose this moment to speak. "Perhaps we could focus on constructive solutions rather than rehashing past grievances. Dominic, what would resolve this situation to your satisfaction?" "Complete transformation," Dominic replied without hesitation. "New ownership, new leadership, new culture. Washington Airlines needs to become a company where excellence is valued regardless of race, and where accountability isn't optional." Taylor's face flushed. "You want me to hand over my company because one flight attendant allegedly mishandled a backpack? That's absurd." "No," Dominic corrected. "I want you to recognize that your company has fundamental flaws that you're either unwilling or unable to address. The incident with my daughter wasn't isolated. It was a symptom of systemic problems you've encouraged or ignored." Taylor's composure finally cracked. "This is nothing but the race card being played by someone wealthy enough to make it stick," he snapped. "Your daughter wasn't discriminated against. She was treated like any other passenger who doesn't follow instructions. But because you've got billions and black skin, you think you can cry racism and take whatever you want." The restaurant fell, silent. At nearby tables, diners pretended not to listen while straining to hear every word. Several had recognized the confrontation's participants and discreetly activated their phones' recording functions. Dominic remained perfectly calm, which seemed to infuriate Taylor further. "Your response proves everything my investigation uncovered about the culture you've created at Washington Airlines," he said quietly. Thank you for making my point so clearly." Turning to the CFO, Dominic shifted topics with devastating precision. "Patricia, you should know that as of this morning, Carter Enterprises controls 48% of Washington Airlines' outstanding debt. We've also secured agreements with creditors holding another 23%. That gives us effective control over your company's financial future, regardless of stock ownership." Patricia Barnes paled visibly. As CFO, she understood the implications immediately. "That's not possible. Our debt is held by a diverse group of—" "It was," Dominic confirmed, "until they lost confidence in Richard's leadership. Now they've consolidated their positions with a partner they trust to protect their investments." Taylor looked to his CFO for contradiction, found none, and turned to his attorneys, who appeared equally blindsided. The power dynamic in the room had shifted palpably. "You've been outmaneuvered, Richard," Dominic continued, "but I'm still prepared to offer you a dignified exit. Resign as CEO, sell your shares at yesterday's closing price, which is generous given what's coming, and walk away. We'll handle the transition without dragging your name through further public scrutiny." "And if I refuse?" Taylor challenged, though his voice had lost its earlier conviction. "Then tomorrow morning we'll file our SEC complaint regarding your misrepresentations to shareholders. By afternoon, we'll call your loans based on covenant violations our financial team has identified. By close of business, Washington Airlines will face a liquidity crisis that will trigger an emergency board meeting. And by this time tomorrow, you'll be facing the same choice, but with significantly worse terms and potential legal consequences." The methodical explanation of Taylor's impending downfall was delivered without malice or triumph, simply as the inevitable outcome of decisions already made. Taylor looked to Reynolds for support, but the other businessman was already mentally calculating his own exposure and exit strategy. The alliance of convenience between them was dissolving before their eyes. "This is corporate blackmail," Taylor said finally, but the accusation sounded hollow even to his own ears. "No," Zara corrected him gently. "This is consequences. Something your privilege has shielded you from for far too long." As they prepared to leave, Taylor made one final desperate attempt to reassert control. "Your daughter will regret the day she complained about my airline," he said, his voice low and threatening. "The business world has a long memory, and someday she'll learn what happens to people who cross Richard Taylor." The threat against Amara shattered Dominic's composed demeanor. For the first time, genuine anger flashed in his eyes as he leaned across the table. "Listen carefully, because I will only say this once," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "You have until midnight to accept my offer. After that, I won't just take your company. I will dismantle everything you've built, piece by piece, until—" "The name Richard Taylor is synonymous with failure in every business school case study for the next 50 years. He straightened, composure restored. "And if you ever mention my daughter again, you'll discover that my patience has limits even if my resources don't." As Dominic and Zara departed, leaving Taylor and his team in stunned silence, other diners pretended to return their attention to their meals. But several were already texting contacts in the financial world with variations of the same message. "Taylor is finished. Carter just ended him." In the car, Zara reached for Dominic's hand. "Do you think he'll accept?" "It doesn't matter," Dominic replied. "Either way, Washington Airlines will have new leadership by the end of the week. And either way, Amara will see that some injustices can be corrected if you have the courage and resources to stand your ground." At precisely 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes before Dominic's deadline expired, his phone rang. It was Richard Taylor, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Send the paperwork," he said without preamble. "I'll sign." Dominic ended the call without reply and immediately initiated the final phase of his plan, a series of carefully orchestrated financial maneuvers that would be executed at midnight, giving Carter Enterprises controlling interest in Washington Airlines. By morning, the business world would have a new story to discuss: how a father's determination to right a wrong had transformed an entire company and sent a powerful message about accountability in corporate America. The morning sun cast a golden glow across the Manhattan skyline as Dominic stood before the wall-to-wall windows of his office, watching the city awaken. On his desk, financial terminals displayed the breaking news. Carter Enterprises acquires controlling interest in Washington Airlines. The overnight financial maneuvers had been executed flawlessly. While Richard Taylor had believed he was simply agreeing to resign and sell his personal shares, Dominic's team had simultaneously completed transactions with multiple shell companies, bringing their total ownership to 51%. By the time markets opened, the takeover was complete and irreversible. Taylor, who had expected a gradual transition that would allow him to shape the narrative of his departure, was instead met with security personnel at Washington Airlines headquarters, his access credentials already deactivated. The personal belongings from his office had been packed in boxes and waited in the lobby. "Your resignation has been accepted, effective immediately," the head of security informed him, handing over a formal letter. "The board has been called for an emergency meeting at 10 a.m. Taylor's face contorted with rage. "This isn't what I agreed to. I was supposed to have time to—" "Your agreement specified resignation and sale of shares," the security chief interrupted, unmoved. "Both have been executed. Your presence is no longer required or authorized on these premises." As Taylor was escorted from the building he had ruled for almost 2 decades, employees watched from behind partially closed doors and computer screens. Many fought to hide their smiles. A few openly celebrated once he was out of sight. At 10 o'clock precisely, Washington Airlines' board members assembled in the executive conference room, expressions ranging from anxious to curious. Most had received only cryptic notifications about urgent developments requiring immediate attention. When Dominic entered, accompanied by Zara and a small team of Carter Enterprises executives, the atmosphere shifted from confusion to understanding. This was more than a changing of the guard, it was a complete transformation. "Good morning," Dominic began, his tone professional but warm. "As you've likely heard by now, Carter Enterprises has acquired majority ownership of Washington Airlines. This gives us the authority to make immediate leadership changes, which the current situation demands." He outlined the findings of Alicia Thompson's investigation, the systematic discrimination, the safety violations, the toxic corporate culture that had flourished under Taylor's leadership. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, aware of their own complicity in overlooking these issues. "Effective immediately, Richard Taylor is removed as CEO," Dominic continued. "His employment has been terminated for cause, based on documented evidence of discriminatory practices, misrepresentation to shareholders, and failure to maintain safety standards." One board member, Robert Wilson, Brittany's uncle, raised an objection. "This is an overreaction to isolated incidents being mischaracterized as systemic problems. Richard has built this airline from—" "Your opinion is noted," Dominic interrupted, calmly. "And your resignation from this board is accepted." Wilson blinked in surprise. "I haven't resigned." "Check your email," Dominic suggested. "You'll find a detailed accounting of your role in suppressing discrimination complaints, including those against your niece. You can resign now, or we can present this evidence in a more public forum. Your choice." Wilson's face drained of color as he checked his phone. After scanning the email, he stood without another word and left the room. The remaining board members sat in stunned silence, suddenly aware that this acquisition was unlike any they had previously experienced. This wasn't just about financial control, it was about accountability. "Now," Dominic continued once Wilson had departed, "I'd like to introduce Washington Airlines' new chief executive officer." He gestured to Zara, who stepped forward confidently. Many of you may not know that before supporting my entrepreneurial journey, Zara Carter was a senior operations analyst at American Airlines and holds an MBA from Wharton with a specialization in aviation management. Her expertise in operational efficiency and organizational culture makes her uniquely qualified to lead Washington Airlines through this transition. The surprise on the board members' faces was evident. They had underestimated Zara, seeing her only as Dominic's wife rather than a highly qualified executive in her own right. "Thank you, Dominic," Zara said, taking center stage. "My first actions as CEO will be addressing the cultural and operational issues that have undermined this airline's potential. Effective immediately, We're implementing comprehensive anti-discrimination, training for all staff, revising service protocols to ensure consistent treatment of all passengers, and establishing an independent oversight committee for customer complaints. She outlined additional changes. Safety protocols would be enhanced beyond industry standards. Maintenance schedules would be revised to prioritize passenger welfare over cost-cutting, and a thorough review of all personnel would identify both problematic employees and overlooked talent deserving promotion. Washington Airlines has the routes, the equipment, and the market position to be an industry leader, Zara concluded. What it has lacked is leadership that values every customer and employee equally. That changes today. As the board meeting continued with detailed discussions of implementation timelines and financial projections, across town, Brittany Wilson received a certified letter informing her that her administrative leave had been converted to termination for cause. Similar notices went out to several other employees whose conduct had been documented in Alicia's investigation. By afternoon, news of the dramatic leadership changes dominated business headlines. Industry analysts who had initially questioned Dominic's acquisition motives now praised the decisive action to address long-standing issues at the airline. The public response was overwhelmingly positive. On social media, the hashtag #BoycottWashingtonAir was replaced by #Tomber New Day New Way, as customers expressed cautious optimism about the changes. Former passengers who had experienced discrimination shared their stories, finally feeling heard and validated. 3 months later, the transformation was well underway. Under Zara's leadership, Washington Airlines, now rebranded as Horizon Air, had implemented sweeping changes that were already showing results. Customer satisfaction scores had risen dramatically, employee morale had improved, and operational efficiency metrics were trending upward. The Wilson family's influence had been completely removed from the company. Robert Wilson's replacement on the board was Dr. Angela Washington, a respected expert in organizational ethics with a track record of helping companies build inclusive cultures. In the gleaming lobby of Horizon Air's headquarters, a new installation attracted attention from visitors and employees alike. Amara's rebuilt solar energy device was displayed in a custom case, accompanied by a plaque that read, "Innovation deserves respect. Talent transcends background. Excellence is our only standard." Beside it, a newly established scholarship program was announced. The Amara Carter Science Initiative, providing funding and mentorship for young scientists from underrepresented groups. The first year's recipients included 10 brilliant students whose projects might otherwise have gone unrecognized. On a bright Saturday morning, the Carter family prepared to board a Horizon Air flight to visit Amara's grandmother in Atlanta, their first time flying the airline since the incident that had started everything. As they settled into their first class seats, a flight attendant approached with genuine warmth. "Welcome aboard," she said, helping Amara carefully stow her backpack. "Is there anything special in there we should be careful with?" "Just my new science project," Amara replied with a smile. "I'm working on an improved version with better efficiency." "That's wonderful," the attendant said sincerely. "I'd love to hear more about it during the flight if you'd like to share." The interaction was brief but meaningful, a small illustration of the larger changes that had transformed the airline from top to bottom. Later, as they reached cruising altitude, Dominic looked over at his daughter, engrossed in sketching refinements to her latest invention. "What do you think, Sunshine? Has anything good come from what happened with your project?" Amara considered the question thoughtfully. "I think sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt better," she said, echoing his words from months earlier. "My new solar device is way more efficient than the original. And now the airline is better, too." Dominic smiled. "That's an important lesson. Systems don't change by themselves. Sometimes it takes someone willing to stand up and say, 'This isn't right,' to create meaningful change." "Is that why Mom is running the company now?" Amara asked. "Partly," Dominic acknowledged, "but mostly because she's brilliant at what she does, and now everyone can see that. Talent shouldn't be hidden because of who someone is or what they look like." Meanwhile, in her new office at Horizon Air headquarters, Zara was reviewing applications for executive positions as part of her ongoing restructuring. On her desk, was a resume that had come through the standard application portal. Brittany, Wilson's application for a customer service director position at a competing airline. Zara picked up the red rejected stamp and pressed it firmly across the application. Next to it, she wrote a simple note: "Discrimination has consequences." She then turned to more important matters: building an airline where everyone was treated with dignity, where excellence was recognized regardless of background, and where her daughter could fly without fear of being made to feel she didn't belong. The transformation of Washington Airlines into Horizon Air would become a case study in business schools, not just for the dramatic acquisition strategy, but for demonstrating how corporate culture could be fundamentally changed when leadership prioritized justice alongside profit. And Richard Taylor? He had disappeared from public view, his reputation tarnished by the revelations about his leadership. The business world had moved on, more interested in Horizon Air's promising future than in the disgraced executive's past. For Dominic and Zara Carter, the victory wasn't measured in stock certificates or corporate assets. It was measured in the knowledge that they had created lasting change, not just for their daughter, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel they didn't belong in first class. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination like what happened to Amara? Would you stand up and fight for change, even if it meant taking on powerful opponents? Comment below with your thoughts on how you would handle a similar situation. If this story of determination and justice inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more incredible stories of people who refuse to accept injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that one person can make a difference when they refuse to back down. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes systems need to be broken before they can be rebuilt better. This powerful story teaches us that injustice thrives when good people remain silent. When Amara faced discrimination, her parents didn't just accept it, they transformed an entire system. True change requires courage, resources, and unwavering determination. The story shows that discrimination is rarely just one incident, but often reflects deeper systemic problems that must be addressed at their roots. We learn that accountability matters. In a world where powerful people often escape consequences, Dominic and Zara demonstrated that justice is possible when someone refuses to back down. Their victory wasn't just personal, it created lasting change for countless others who would have faced similar treatment. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that our children are watching how we respond to injustice. By standing firm against discrimination, Dominic and Zara taught Amara that her dignity was worth fighting for, and that she deserved to be treated with respect regardless of her skin color. They showed her that sometimes you must break systems to rebuild them better, transforming pain into purpose and obstacles into opportunities for growth. Has discrimination ever touched your life or someone you care about? What did you do in that moment? Speak up or stay silent? Comment below with your experience and what you wish you had done differently. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help more people discover it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about overcoming injustice and standing up for what's right. Share this video with someone who needs encouragement to fight back against discrimination in their own life. Thank you for joining us on this journey of courage and transformation. Remember, change begins when one person decides that injustice is unacceptable, and that person could be you.